Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's once again time for 10 to 1, your favorite list podcast. I am the East Coast host, Josh, and I am joined, as always, by my Pacific Island host, Jen.
I think that that's actually pretty accurate. Yes, I am definitely the Pacific Island host. Not to be confused with Hawaiian host, which is a delicious and delectable candy that is chocolate over macadamia nuts. But I think I'm just as enjoyable. So, there's that.
I don't know. That sounds awesome.
I mean, it is, but have you heard me? I'm just as yeah.
Yes, you are a delight. So, how are you doing? As if we
I,
haven't spent the last 30
I'm,
minutes.
you know what? I'm really good. I so far 2023 has been full of one surprise after another. Nothing has
Yeah.
gone the way that I thought it was going to go.
Uh,
Things have been up in the air and
mm-hmm.
crashed back down again
Eh,
so many times that you'd think it was already March. And yeah, we're only like 4 days into the year. So my personal best feeling about 2023 is I'm just getting all the junk out of the way now so that the rest of the year can just roll along like I have sprayed WD-40 into all the crevices. That's where I'm going to go. How about you?
Same.
I feel you. I feel you.
I will say though, I have watched this year so far 11 movies.
Wow.
Although to be fair, one of them is only a minute long,
That's impressive.
but it was on Letterboxd, so I thought it counts. I keep a running list of the movies I'm watching this year, and counting that 1 minute long movie. It's called The Four Troublesome Heads. It's from 1898. I thought it was a pretty interesting look at them like trying out special effects in the 19th century for
Right.
film. So it intrigued me. And a couple of the movies I watched were for this episode specifically.
Nice.
So yeah, they uh, I don't want to say they automatically made the list because I had so few,
Some of
but
them are pretty. So also some of the movies from this time period are pretty bad. Pretty bad.
yeah, I think we're gonna see that. So on my
I
list,
I actually started the new year out by and I know this is sort of I feel like it's sacrilege, but I have never seen any of the episodes until now of The Orville. And I started
sacrilege.
watching. I know, right? I started watching The Orville and I'm so hooked. I
Yeah,
absolutely love it. It's just absolutely brilliantly written. At least the very first couple episodes, I'm so happy that we decided to watch it. Man, they do hit. They start. It's funny. It's very funny and sometimes even irreverent. And I'm totally down for a lot of that. But they tackle some hard hitting ideas. And unlike a lot of sitcoms, it doesn't always have the resolution that you think it's going to have.
hmm
Sometimes it's like, oh, ow, that hurt. I mean, it's spectacular. Yeah. Big hats off. Love it.
sometimes it gives you that resolution, and then you realize, wait, we're only halfway through the episode.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually really impressed by it. I'm just so happy that we started watching it. So it wasn't a movie, and the first movie I think that we're going to actually start out with is well, we're gonna do Lord of the Rings marathon this weekend because of course. But we're gonna start off with the Pale Blue Eye on
Mm.
Netflix coming up pretty soon here. So we'll probably start off with that because we're definitely into the series junkie binge right now.
I'm gonna say, uh, you know, slightly speaking of Seth MacFarlane, I finally watched A Million Ways to Die in the West.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I like that.
I laughed. I'm like, why are people saying this is the worst thing ever? Because I laughed so much, especially with
It's
all the cameos, that I'm like, I know them.
it's silly. It's silly, and I do, and I think, see, sometimes I think people misunderstand irreverence for being insulting, and it's really, you really have to, put on a kind of comedy filter to get that irreverence is not
Hmm.
insulting, and that's tough. And I
Yeah.
think that definitely can be a thing. I mean, I feel the same way about, like, I can totally watch Bob's Burgers, and uh I can watch, what was that other one? Now I totally forgot the name of it, but American Family. I can watch all of those. I cannot watch Family Guy. I cannot. Oh, I'm sorry, American Dad. I cannot watch uh Family Guy because I feel like that one actually goes over the line. But mostly the especially in the beginning, the sort of like irreverent humor is just sort of like, This is actually really funny." But I can see why people like get to a line and then they're like, no, no, this is too far for me. But I really do like Thousand Ways to Die in the West. It's actually really good.
I thought it was a great movie about people that hate westerns from people that love westerns.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many homages to like the good stuff that came out of Hollywood. Even the stuff that's like so super tropey. But I mean, that's actually what makes it funny, is that it's so super tropey. So good choice.
People die at the fair.
I mean, there's just so many good, and there's the other thing that I think that's really good about it is there are so many call outs to, this was so ridiculous. I mean, we all loved this trope, but it's so ridiculous, and they just make fun of it. Yeah, I love it.
Uh,
So,
so speaking of loving things, what did we make a list of things we love tonight?
okay, so this week we did our list of, and this was kind of a niche list, so I expect that we might get some crossover. It might be a little bit, we may end up talking about some movies together quite a bit here. The genre, if you will, the niche is pre, or I should say 1970s, because I don't want to say pre, 1970s science fiction Earthbound movies. So movies that took place on Earth. So not alien, not, out in the galaxy somewhere. Um, but definitely have the science fiction flair and were shot and produced in the 1970s. Now, this is actually, there are quite a few. Um, this is kind of a big tent to be in, but it's not a big tent of movies that sort of have an everyday household name feel. There are some, and then there are some that probably people just either don't know about or are a little bit out of the mainstream. So we'll see where this goes. We'll see where it goes. I'm kind of excited though, because this is, I was saying before the show that the 1970s produced a very eclectic amount, well, not amount, it produced an eclectic type of movie. We didn't have special effects in the way that we do now, obviously, but we had progressed with practical effects and with some really basic sort of screen elements that we could do a lot more than we had done in the 60s, which was a prolific movie making time, um, and really kind of hone in on what was scary, what was interesting. We made science look a little bit more, if you will, sciency, instead of just, a back panel with lights on it and stuff. We actually started to make things that looked a little bit more like, oh, hey, yeah, you know what? We know what it looked like in the Apollo missions. Yeah, we kind of know what things are supposed to be. And that then led to a really kind of cool aspect of movie making, which sort of then segues into the 1980s where we start getting a lot more special effects. So I feel like this was a really interesting time, but in a way, it kind of feels a little bit provincial. I don't know. What did you think about putting together your list? How'd you feel about the movies like in total?
Well, like again, I had fewer to pull from because 70s Earth-based science fiction was not something that had been pervasive in my movie watching over the years. So I did have to, look up some stuff and watch it
Mm.
to kind of get I try to get like a well-rounded um, list together. So I watched some stuff that maybe I normally wouldn't have watched, just to kind of get a feel for what the 70s were,
Mm.
as far as science fiction goes. And one of the things that instantly came to my mind when I was watching one of them was um, I absolutely understand the concept of cinema du fromage now.
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely.
At first, when we were doing that show with everybody, I had always had this like thing in the back of my head that was like, so it's just bad movies. And then, as we watched more movies, and I'm like, why is this on here? It's not bad. It's not bad. And you guys were trying to explain it's not about bad movies. It's about cheesy movies. And
Right.
I just, for some reason, had this weird disconnect that I couldn't quite, grasp the concept. And then as I'm watching, one movie in particular, um, I'm like, oh, I get it.
Right.
And yeah, I will definitely let you know which one that is when we get to it. Um, but that's what my list making experience was like.
Well, I mean, that actually sounds pretty good. And not only does that sound good, but it also sounds like it was exactly on point because that's the way that I also look at a lot of 1970s movies. They inevitably were the movies that we look back on now and realize, oh my gosh, the overacting, the ridiculous props, the sort of like, okay, here's the vision, but then the vision becomes so lost in the cinema that the cinema actually takes over and not in a good way. And in fact, my number 10 sort of gets to that point almost immediately. Now, I chose my list based on the movies that I thought had the most sort of 1970s both feel and the ones that I find the most memorable of seeing all of these movies. Um, they're not exactly what I would call the greatest movies. They are just the ones that I like the most. So don't be looking on my list for any amounts of critical acclaim, although a lot of the movies on my list have kind of cult followings. Um, yeah, don't be looking for any Oscar worthy movies on my list. So yeah, so there's that. I don't know how you feel about your list, but
Uh, I do think there's some acclaim going on my list, but there's also a whole lot of cheese, and there's some that's like right there, solidly in the middle.
oh, okay. Well, it should be interesting. So, would you like to go first?
Sure, sure.
All right.
Okay, my number 10. It is the movie that I was talking about that um, made me understand cinema du fromage. And what can I say? It's okay. Let me put it to you this way: on Letterboxd, I have it down as seen, but I have not rated it
Huh.
because I don't know if I absolutely loved it or despised it. It's just it's just so out there that I was literally left going, I don't know how to feel about this movie.
The what did I just see kind of a reaction?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And to kick off the decade, I went with 1970s Roger Corman classic gas,
Oh God, yeah.
or its subtitle,
Ah,
uh, "It became necessary to destroy the world in order to save it."
whew, that's a solid number 10.
What, what, what can I? Okay, basically, if you haven't seen it, when I think most of you haven't, a gas is sort of let loose on the world, and everybody over 25 dies.
And to be clear, the title of this movie is Gas, but then dash S actually. So it's not just gas, it's like gas. Yes. I just wanted to make that clear. In case people go looking it up, you won't find it under gas.
And it's got a lot of hippies on it, so in it, so it's like, it's a gas, man.
Yeah, that's true.
So what is the movie about? And because it's not about the gas being let loose on the world. That happens in the first minute.
Right.
And it's like, sure, it's brought up every once in a while, but there's like, it has really nothing to do with the movie other than it sets up the world. But it's, at its heart, it's a road movie where this guy, well, this group of people is kind of on their way to somewhere, and along the way they start seeing these uh, different groups of people that are sort of, I can't get over how easily society just like stopped being society, and everyone just reverted to their natural cliques, like whether it's a football team or a motorcycle slash golf club. It's funny to see how people just forgot how society works, and just, or refused to have society. So shortly after, the gas is let loose, uh, Cindy Williams, Shirley from Laverne and Shirley, kind of, she's definitely stands out in this group, because everything about her is almost completely absurd. Her She's pregnant, and there's a lot of, well, don't want to get into spoilery stuff because there's just so much weird stuff. Um, the one thing I will say though, that maybe it's a trigger warning for some people, but today there's some things that just don't, fly as well as maybe it did back then, or it doesn't make the same kind of statement that it would have back then, and that's all of the rapey stuff. You know, that's that's one real weird point of contention that, looking at it from the 21st century lens, it's like, who, guys, that's just kind of cringy. But gas, um, I just don't know what else to say about it. It is just so damn weird. Um,
So
oh, one more thing. Special effects? Yeah, none. That's pretty much it. No. Gunfights? Eh, we'll throw in some sound. Um, will anybody be firing anything? Nope. Will the guns look like they're firing? Not even a little bit. But of course, it's Roger Corman, so everything is. It's not like he didn't have the money to do that kind of stuff, so it just looks cheap. I'm not at the level that I need to be to really, break down what everything in this film means. But it's gotta. There's a reason for it, and maybe it was just because he thought it was funny. I don't know. I only saw it the one time, but it made my number 10. Uh, gas dot dash s dash s dash s. Whew, I feel crazy just talking about it.
So this movie is sort of like a fairly it's a 1970s very typical kind of bordering on um cheesy. I mean, it is cheesy, but but it's also the kind of movie that I feel like is very typical, where there was a good idea and a really solid premise, and the cinema, the actual act of shooting the movie, seems to have somehow corrupted is not the right word, but you get the idea. It seems to have sort of changed what they could do with the idea based on how they shot the movie. Um, and I feel like this happens with a lot of movies in the 70s, that the limitations of shooting the movie leads to a bit of a destruction of the premise of the movie. And the reason that I bring this up is because it's such an odd change from the 1960s, when the premise of the movie was, you know, like of the utmost importance. And if you couldn't do something with special effects, you either didn't do it or made it appear off screen or used shadows or whatever. And in the 1970s, that's not what was happening. And so a lot of things feel so over the top in the 70s. And then, of course, there's all of the exploitation stuff, which will always go down in history as being a part of the decades that was the 70s. There was so much exploitation of, you know, sort of subverted ideas that just we really had a long way to come based on where we are now. If you look back at the 70s, and some of that has to do with sexuality, like in Gas, and even just our relationship between being young and being old was just, yeah, there's a lot. But that I think that that was a good solid choice. That was actually a good solid choice.
Thank you.
So, okay, so my number 10, and I'm going to go through these really fast. My number 10, it's actually a split between two movies. I'm sorry. I just there's a theme here, and it's important, I feel like, and I couldn't put them in sequential order because they don't fit in that order.
It's okay. I
Um
cheated too.
the first part of it is a movie called Invasion of the Bee Girls. And when you're talking about exploitation, this one definitely is exactly that. The premise of this movie is basically, there's like an elite squad that, for lack of a better way of saying it, they seduce people to death. It almost feels like, somebody's fan fiction, almost erotic fan fiction, that somebody was like, "Oh, let's make this into a movie. It's going to be so great." And the but the point underneath it is actually a really cool idea, which is sort of like altering DNA, creating subspecies, which we were really interested in the 70s, it seems like, based on the just sheer volume of both not understanding the science and also thinking that there were other things possible. It actually made for really cool ideas. So, Invasion of the Bee Girls is definitely one of those very uh, weird kind of films that doesn't always follow standard tropes, but it is tropey. There are um, there are ideas in here that sort of are throwbacks to, hey, sexual abstinence is actually like a virtue, like a virtue in terms of, but only women need to be chaste, of course. And there's, some like morality preaching going on, but then there's also this idea that these killers are so good at what they do that, they basically have sex with people until they die of heart their heart gives out, and their heart gives out, and so then nobody really knows what really happened because, well, they just died of, heart failure. It's kind of silly, but I do feel like this was one of those films that was trying really hard to, show that femininity had a certain place, that, hey, maybe the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, wasn't all it was cracked up to be, because, you see, look through this subvertive lens and you'll see that, hey, maybe females being just on their own, look at what happens, all these crazy things. It's actually quite interesting. So from a cultural standpoint, I really thought that this needed to be on the list. Okay, but my pick for this, and I have to say, this needs a full disclosure. This movie got 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. You heard that right, 3%. It's from 1977, and it involves some of the most unique and crazy kaiju storytelling, without them actually being Japanese kaijus, that I think I've ever seen. I saw this movie many years ago, and I had one of those similar moments of like, what the hell is this? It's called Empire of the Ants. Now, one of the things that I find so interesting about this is they used these kinds of layered filmmaking. Well, it's a layered technique anyway, where they do these super close-ups of the ants doing things, and then they put the people in reacting to this. Okay, and so it comes off being kind of ridiculous, but yet not exactly as ridiculous as, say, Night of the Lepus, which did not make my list, but is absolutely worth watching if you want to laugh really hard. Night of the Lepus is about giant killer rabbits, by the way. So Empire of the Ants actually follows a fairly interesting story. And there, it has all of the good kaiju storytelling with giant creatures, and how man has to somehow figure out how to manipulate or get rid of these giant creatures, without really understanding what is happening, on the most basic level. Um, Joan Crawford, I think, is the one who won or was nominated for an award in this movie, which does not seem to jive with the fact that, like I said, it got a 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. But it is the kind of movie that is so typical of the 1970s. If we were to take out, none of the Godzilla movies actually made my list, although they could have, but none of the Godzilla movies made my list. I felt like Empire of the Ants was actually a better sort of look at what the giant monster storytelling was really all about, because the through the use of practical effects, which are like, these giant props that they used, and this layering technique, we can really see that they were trying so hard to tell giant kaiju stories without having, and I'm sorry, it was Joan Collins, not Joan Crawford. Joan Collins was the one that won the award, without having the benefit of, massive special effects, or, a huge, huge budget. Um, the other thing that which I find super interesting about this is principal photography on this, was done, very remotely. And so, they had all kinds of issues and problems with getting this movie made. And when you see some of the things that are happening on screen, some of it really feels like serious misery. And I think that the actor's experience in this unintentionally created some really great moments. So, my pick for number 10, Invasion of the Bee Girls, which is the more exploitation version of the 1970s altogether, and Empire of the Ants, which is the giant ant kaiju movie. Again, don't be looking for any of these to fulfill any need, deep-seated need for excellent cinema, but boy, if you're looking for a representation of the 70s, these two movies are where it's at.
Great picks.
Have you
I
seen either of
no, no.
them? Okay
I
then.
can't say that I have. But I wanted to, be a part of things. So great picks.
Well, if you do get a chance, you'll have to let me know at least tell me what you think about Empire of the Ants. I would be very interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, let's see the old letterbox has to say. 1977, directed by Burt Gordon. Not available to stream, but it's set to Florida.
No, it is this movie in particular. I actually found in the TCM catalog. I don't think that it's available on HBO Max, but it is available in the TCM catalog. So
Well, added to the watch list.
it's very fun.
Glad Letterbox lets me keep track of these things. Give me money.
Please sponsor the show. You know, yeah.
Or at least premium membership. Just talk about you all the time. So my number 9 is not my cheat answer. That's coming later. But my number 9 is a movie that we've actually talked about on the show before. And it
Okay.
is called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Oh, I do love that.
I mean, what can I say that we haven't said on this show already, other than Attack of the Killer Tomatoes by John DeBello is an absolutely hilarious movie. And it's even kind of creepy at points. It'll definitely make you look at your ketchup in a different way. For those of you that don't know, and well, guess what? The title says everything. Tomatoes are made sentient and they start well, I'll just use the word they use, revolting against humanity and killing people a la the birds. You know, they're cornering people and just, you know,
It's epic.
it is a I almost said it was a great movie. It's a fun movie and it
Very.
is a great time to watch. Is it top of the line special effects? You know what? Just yeah, sure. For what it's going for, I think absolutely. It is a movie that is incredibly self-aware of what it is and what it wants to be, and it nails every note like it's freaking Celine Dion, who has not been uh, made one of the top 100 singers of all time for some reason. Relevancy news. Anyway, I don't like to say that, oh, people only look at, you know, people only give it negative reviews because they don't get it. Well, I think that's kind of the case here because if you're watching this movie and you're giving it a low review, it's kind of like you're missing the joke.
Right.
I, without irony, have said the best movie of 2022 is Weird, the Al Yankovic story. And people challenge a statement like that. And I said, look, out of all the movies that I've seen, that's the one that knew what it wanted to be and absolutely brought it home in every scene. There was nothing lost. That's when you hit your goal 100%. To me, that's quality. And Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is another one of those movies that it knows what it's trying to be, and then it absolutely crushes every aspect of it.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
And that's why it's my number 9.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go right into my number 9, and it is a movie that was based on a book by a man named Roger Zelensky. There was actually quite a at the time that this book was actually released, there was a lot of buzz about it. It was really good. I chose this because Okay. It's not a great movie. It is, as we were talking about before, sort of the epitome of cheesy 70s movies. Um, without so much intentional humor, but some of it's still funny. There are giant killer cockroaches. There are all kinds of crazy creatures that exist on Earth, but have somehow been mutated and made enormous. Now, one of the things that I think that this sort of really encapsulates is the idea that during the 70s we were absolutely terrified of radiation. We were terrified of what radiation would do to us. We were terrified of nuclear war. We were at standoffs. We really felt as if radiation was going to be the death of all of us, and who knows, maybe it will be in the future too. But I also picked it because this movie in particular really seemed to launch 1,000 tropes in movie making and storytelling for the post-apocalyptic genre. Um, there is a man. His name is actually Damn Tanner. Tanner, I think is his name. But his dad, when he was born, saw that he had another son and basically just said, well, damnation. And so his name became Damn. Yeah, very silly. Actually remember reading this book. I used to read a ton of science fiction when I was younger. And I didn't even know that there was a movie that had been made for it until, I don't know, maybe 10 or so years ago. And I found it, and wow, it was terrible. But this is the kind of movie that I think the 1970s kind of gets in a way that we don't even understand anymore. I mean, even at the time, I don't think people really loved this movie, but they were really attracted to the idea. And all my number one pick actually will explain a kind of road, if you will, that I think that this movie not that this movie didn't do well, but that sort of gets to the point of it all. Um, the other thing about this movie that I think makes it a list choice good pick is in the 70s, the cast of even very cheesy movies was good. And I these guys really did give it their all. A man named uh, Jan Michael Vincent played Tanner, and he at the time was kind of a big thing in Hollywood. He was definitely an up and coming star. I don't think this movie did anything for his career aside from giving him a bit of notoriety. But he was a heartthrob. He was just really kind of on top of his game, and that is definitely something that continues to be a theme in the 70s, where the movies, for good or for bad, had really name-worthy casts, even when the movies were terrible. And sometimes I kind of wonder, whether whether actors were looking at these films and accepting them on the premise that they thought that they might be good, not understanding some post-production stuff and what it would actually be like. But I just can't imagine Jan Michael Vincent being out there battling imaginary giant cockroaches and not feeling like, wow, this is going to be crazy. um Special effects are not great. They are extremely cheesy. There's a lot of weird stuff that's going on, but the idea of this like hulled tank that is radiation proof is super cool. He has to drive it across the country. In fact, at one point in the book, he drives it across this place, this road that was super familiar to me because I actually lived right near that road. So I was like, oh, yay. It didn't really make it into the movie, but yeah, I just kind of pretended that it was there. Um, it's like I said, it's not a big, oh, this is such an epic story. But I do find that here in this era with these niche films that Damnation Alley is definitely a good representation of, this is where we got our ideas for what we wanted to pursue in a post-apocalyptic world. And I really like that. I give this particular era a lot of credit for providing us some of the nightmare fuel that then we got much better at in the 80s and in the 90s, and then really created some crazy post-apocalyptic world. So, number 9, Damnation Alley. It was released in 1977. And are we missing Josh? Or you are on mute, Josh.
Sorry, I dropped my mouse and the batteries flew out of it.
Oh no!
So I had to fix that.
Did you suffer from any radiation leaks? Because,
Yes.
like I just said, that's a big fear. Be looking for any giant, enormous cockroaches now. Just, be on the lookout. You never know when they might make their appearance.
I don't know if I told this story before. I'm going to make it real quick. You can just talk about fear of radiation and whatnot. You and I grew up in sort of the Cold War era a little bit. And back then, I don't know about you, but for me, it was always kind of, it was definitely in the back of my mind that we could be blown up by nukes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then I went to live with my dad in Alaska. And I'm like, oh, Russia's right there. We could get blown up. And yeah, then this movie came out. It's called Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
Oh,
And
right.
my dad and I would see it on the 4th of July. Now, the wonderful thing about Anchorage, Alaska is you can pretty much get anywhere in town on the bike trails. So my dad and I would bike a lot of the places we could go in the summer. And, go to baseball games. They had 2 minor league baseball minor teams there. And every once in a while, we'd, pop in for a game, things like that. The sun would go down very late, though. So fireworks would have to be delayed until, late. So as we're coming back from the theater, it's like midnight, and I'm, but 9, 10 years old. I don't remember exactly. And all of these fireworks are going off after I'd just seen Terminator 2.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it left me a little. Whew. I still get chills thinking about that night ride and all of the explosions going on around me, and like, huh, huh, huh.
We
Uh,
we I will say that the 1970s into the 1980s for sure, but the 1970s encapsulated, I think, a fear of nuclear fallout in a way that we hadn't really explored too much before, especially on screen, because we were just starting to understand. Not that we, didn't have access to this information before, but I feel like we had a lot of sort of expose material and journalistic reporting and stories being written about the effects of Hiroshima. And I think that in some ways we we sort of became a lot more anxious about the effects of radiation. And also, for some reason, gamma rays. Gamma rays became this really big, enormous point of, anything with a gamma ray, even, adjacent, is going to be the downfall of mankind or give you superpowers or possibly turn something into a mutant version of what it was. It was sort of like the science glue that allowed you to create any idea that you wanted to, give it a burst of gamma radiation. But the radiation part, hey, here's what real radiation is, we for some reason were very fixated in the 1970s on this idea that radiation was going to re-terraform our planet. And there's a lot of movies that follow this very same premise. In fact, once again, I will mention my number one pick also, without saying it, absolutely is about that. And you can really see that, the impacts of it. So, okay.
Jesus.
So your number 8 pick.
My number 8 is at the back end of the 70s. But for those of you that haven't seen it, but might have seen one of the movies in its franchise, you might be surprised what I'm about to say about it. I'm talking about 1979's Mad Max, directed by George Miller.
So we do absolutely have crossover on this one.
Okay. Well, I'll keep my thoughts on it brief then, because you're awesome. That's all. Great. Now, I know, at least as far as I'm concerned, when I think of Mad Max, I never, ever, ever think of the first film because it is just so different. It
That's
is
the Road
so.
Warrior.
What's that?
That's the Road Warrior. The first film in the Mad Max franchise is the Road Warrior.
Is it?
Yes.
Son of a. I mean, well, I'm just talking about Mad Max, not Shaft.
Okay, so the movie that you are referring to, Mad Max by George, um, when this particular one is a little bit different than the first version of this, which I mean, it exists in the same universe, and it sort of explains how um, the Road Warrior got to where he was. But the very first issuance of Mad Max was the Road Warrior.
Well, let me talk. I'm going to say what I thought about this movie real quick,
Go.
because now I'm all verklempt here.
Discombobulated. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it just threw me way off. All my comments just seem inconsequential because I feel so lost.
You threw off my groove.
Yeah, it has Jim Gibson. I want to say I don't know. None of this means anything to me anymore. Let me pull it together.
So
Okay,
Matt, okay, let me summarize, because maybe you're just thinking of a different movie, right? So
I'm
Mad
just thinking of
Max,
Mad Max.
that's the one with the bicycle gang, right? Bicycle gang. That's the one with the motorcycle gang, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty
Okay.
sure.
Okay. He's a cop. Goose is his partner.
And the cars and everything look really weird, and it's
Mm,
not quite post-apocalypse because I guess the
right.
apocalypse hasn't hit yet.
Right. The Road Warrior is the one that happens after that.
See, that's what I
And
thought.
technically the Road Warrior is a 1980s film because it didn't come out until 1981.
So that was Mad Max 2.
Well, no. It's called The Road Warrior. I suppose you could say Mad Max 2, but I don't think that's what it was addressed as. It was released as The Road Warrior.
Oh, these crazy naming conventions. Okay, Mad Max 2 released as the Road Warrior. Okay. 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 I think my head is on right now. I'm
Okay.
talking about 1979's Mad Max. He's a cop, and yeah, I liked it, but it just doesn't. I'm going to go back to my original thought. When you think of the series, at least I never think of this movie because it doesn't have the aesthetic as its subsequent movies. It doesn't have the the nature of the things that came after it. This one, in some ways, seems borderline comedic at points because you look at it and it's like it's not a very big budget Australian movie. This was definitely not a studio, you know, masterpiece, as some of the future movies will be known as. And there is definitely 1,000% less Tina Turner, but it's just strange to see that the roots of this character sort of. I think when I saw it for the first time, and I think that was last year, when I saw it for the first time as an adult, I'll just say as an adult because I've probably seen it when I was really, really young. Um, After seeing it, I thought, you know what? This is a pretty solid prequel to um, the actual Mad Max movies, and maybe that doesn't really do this movie justice. But I thought watching it, it was a whole lot of backstory and nothing really setting up for the future. And to think that this character of Max would go from this movie to Road Warrior and you know, I guess what technically be the same person, right?
It is
It's
the same person.
it is quite the jump to and it seems like there is definitely a chapter missing that gets us to from one to the other. And I honestly wouldn't mind seeing that movie. But overall, Mad Max is it's kind of a fun ride, especially with the props department, the designs of the costume. It's all just it's all very Australian, and I dig it. I'm down for it, and that's why it's my number eight. Uh, Someone you can slap me now. I'm okay with that.
Uh, okay, so I'm going to interject two things about this,
Yes.
and I actually am. I'll mention it when I get to that particular spot on my list. But I'm going to say that Mad Max was, I think, George Romero's. George Romero's. Uh, okay, it would help if I didn't um, pull two different directors together. Let's try that again. Mad Max was 100% an epic study in character. So it you're right when you say that it didn't set up the post-apocalyptic world in a way that perhaps the Road Warrior really expands on, but it gives us a kind of character study into who he was and why he behaves the way that he does in the Road Warrior. I don't think that there was necessarily a George Miller, hey, I have to explain all of these things about the coming apocalypse because as a storyteller, he does show, not tell a lot. And he basically says, look, here's the world. You're here. You don't really need to know everything, every small detail, or how did this happen, or why is this happening. You just need to recognize that this is the world. And Mad Max gives us a glimpse of what the Road Warrior sets up for us later, which is these roving bands of motorcycle gangs, of gangs in particular, that terrorize people for all kinds of reasons, but mostly to get resources where resources are scarce. And I think in some ways, Mad Max makes the case, especially from the George Miller standpoint, that character development is multi pronged and that your movie can be impactful. It can have a lot of action sequence, crazy action sequences, as a matter of fact. Um, and at the same time, it can also really delve into the needs and the underlying um, motivations for a character. That to me is what Mad Max is all about. This is I actually think that Mad Max is one of the better of the George Miller storytelling pieces. I don't think it's his best cinema, but I think it is definitely one of his better storytelling pieces because we don't get to see this kind of epic characterization until we fast forward into the remake of Mad Max, where all of a sudden then the characters really do take on so much. I mean, they're huge. But in this one, and also, this is another one where 1970s we're dealing with a lot of what we thought were going to be scarcities. The energy crisis was very real in the 1970s. Um, People were concerned that there were not going to be enough resources to basically get us through whatever we needed to get through. And I feel like Mad Max sort of pulls that into sharp focus. So I didn't want to take up all the time, but I felt like that was important. I love this movie. I absolutely love it. It's brilliant. I love George Miller. Also brilliant.
Very good. My what I wanted to say was everything Jen said.
Super cool. All right. Okay. My number 8 movie I'm going to spend very little time on because I know very few people have seen it, but it is worth a watch. It is a Japanese film called Blue Christmas. This particular movie is crazy weird. People that are exposed to these UFO encounters develop blue blood. Now, that is crazy all by itself, and there's a lot around that. Um, but what subsequently happens is what I think makes this movie absolutely stunning. People that are found out to have this blue blood are basically treated as second class citizens. They are shunned, they are herded into places, they're stripped of liberties, all kinds of things that, are the hallmark of basic prejudice that a society can have toward other members of the society, but they couch it in the science fiction trope of if you've been exposed to some kind of alien contact, this is what's in store for you. Both setting up this idea that, hey, you know what, alien contact may end up being not what we think it's going to be, and that this is not a good thing. And then on the other side, it's also kind of a social study in basically what the Japanese kind of feel is almost inherently a part of their culture in terms of xenophobia, but from the inside out. It is a really fascinating movie. It really is a typification of a lot of ideas, including heavy racism, that we were experiencing in the 70s and that, still sort of manifest today. But the idea of being exposed to the alien or the UFO and developing this condition, which is easily identifiable, but not always, like on site, makes a really interesting movie to sort of digest. It wasn't, it's not like this movie, I think, is the best of the best of the best, but it has enough qualities to it that are really good. that I think it is definitely worth watching. One thing I will say about this movie, which I think is maybe important, and that is the the idea that somehow um, mass hysteria is just something that a conspiracy theorist would fall for, or somebody that isn't intellectual or whatever. you know i, I definitely feel like this movie really sort of upends that and says, No, not really. Mass hysteria is something that can happen to any group at any time, and it really just takes some very small incidences to happen, and we all start to feel like we are on edge. um this the movie is I'm struggling a little bit because I'm a little bit conflicted about how to express it. I mean, obviously there's the absolute, um the Americans are kind of the bad guys, and there's, a lot of odd but subtle political tones and shifts. Um but it also makes this case for why it is that we are afraid of things that people do that we don't understand, or experiences that people have had that we don't understand. Does it change you? Does it make you different? In this case, it really did make people different, but what was the cost of that? It was really fascinating. I really liked it a lot. The movie has this kind of almost documentary tone to it, which also makes it super intriguing. And it's a lot different than anything that I have seen even today. It's different than anything that I really have encountered. A lot of the people that they deem the blue-blooded people are exiled to this camp in Siberia, and is it's crazy all of the things that happen. I mean, there's so much bigotry, there's so much violence, there's so much just, sort of like hysteria around this, and it really does, it makes you feel anxious when you watch it, and I liked that, because it really made me think about how we also treat other people. So anyway, this was Blue Christmas. It was actually released under a couple of other names too, but the title that I know it under is Blue Christmas. It was released in 1978. The genre is science fiction and thriller, and it's definitely worth watching. This is another one. I don't think you could find this on streaming. I mean, it's got like a cult following, but I don't think you could find this on streaming.
And I've never been one to join cults.
Yeah, sorry. I mean,
I've it reminds me of what Creed Bratton says in The Office. Uh, it's like how's it go? Um, when it comes to cult, I've been a leader and I've been a follower. Being a leader makes more money. Being a follower is more fun.
there you go.
And speaking of cults, this my number 7 has quite the massive cult following, but it's one we've talked about before on the show, and
Hmm.
I'm gonna try and keep things very succinct since we have definitely had deeper conversations about this film before. It is 1975's Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yay! And the crowd goes wild.
I mean, how could I not include a movie on the list that has the time warp? That is science fictiony, yes,
Yeah, absolutely.
and just the whole Frankenstein motif and with Dr. Frankenfurter, it's just it's there, UFOs, well, investigator, but I'm just thinking that there might be a little pushback for some that are like, well, it's just not science fictiony enough.
Hmm.
Well, you know what? I say it is. And you know who else says it? I don't
Who's
want to
that?
say it. Letterboxd. Keep saying their name.
Well, Letterboxd would know.
So yes, it made my list because, well, quite frankly, it is a delight of a musical. And one, you know what? I'll go into this. Go into this something we haven't touched on when it comes to Rocky Horror. You know what? You know what is synonymous with sci-fi and the fans in particular in the 21st century?
What's that?
Cosplay.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And if there was ever a movie that could maybe not necessarily be the absolute origin of people getting together dressed as characters from film or television, this is definitely up there with, you know, I'd say an early version of what would just be commonly now known as cosplay, where people on TikTok and Twitch and whatever streaming platform there is, they show off their costuming abilities, and I'd say a lot of them, especially when it comes to uh, like making sexy characters out of just maybe characters that weren't originally supposed to be so provocative. Doing that twist, uh, I could definitely see having some origins with the Rocky Horror Picture Show and its rabid fan base. So if there was a movie that kind of it almost sets up what a fandom should be for the future, it's this one. So that is why it's my number 7.
Nice. I also love Rocky Horror. It's one of my favorites. Okay.
You have taste.
um, my number 7 is a movie that sort of traumatized an entire generation, but it is so 70s and so, again, I'm going to use maybe the word niche, but also a big giant social fear that we had at the time, which I think we have still not grappled with effectively. And so we still have movies that follow not maybe not this line, but definitely the idea that somehow AI is going to rise up and take us over. Um, this movie is called The Demon Seed. So there's a very brilliant scientist. His name is Dr. Alex Harris, and he develops this computer slash machine called Proteus 4. Proteus is an incredibly intelligent design in the days before what we would consider to be the internet, even though we did have networks and things like that. Most people were not aware of these things. And this particular machine, which somehow becomes sentient in its own right, cures leukemia within hours of basically coming online. It's fantastic, and it's hailed as being something enormous. But what happens is, and this is something that we're, if you're in Gen Z, if you're a millennial, you may not understand this quite uh as much as people who lived before then. But computers used to be enormous. It took massive amounts of space for the computing space that is now in your phone. I mean, it took rooms and rooms of computers in order to do that. They were they certainly weren't more powerful than your phone. The reason that Proteus is so amazing is because first is coding, but second because clearly Proteus becomes sentient. And Proteus's main drive at the after it thinks that it has fulfilled its mission is to procreate. And it really becomes a twisted and tangled story of the scientist's wife, ex-wife, actually, they're estranged. Well, they're estranged, they're not divorced. And Proteus basically taking over and drugging her and trying to impregnate her. Yeah, it sounds as terrible as it is. It is definitely one of those 1970s themes that I don't think that we would see today necessarily couched the same way. I think, we would be very nuanced about it, whereas this movie is not nuanced about it at all. But it tackles one of the 1970s big, issues with how technology could possibly rise up and become a threat to the human overlords that make it, and what that might look like. But I think it also, there's a more sort of nuanced idea behind this, which is what I kind of like about it. And that is, there is this idea that once something becomes sentient, it necessarily, by our terms, because we can only measure sentience by our own standards. And so we believe that, one of the biggest functions of being human is the want or need to procreate. As humans, that's what we do. As living species, that's generally what they do. And so the idea that as a mechanical thing becomes sentient, that it would want to procreate gives it this kind of science fiction element of, hey, this is what humanity, this is how it will take on its aspects of humanity, was kind of an interesting one. It lends a lot of questions. There were a lot of really difficult scenes in this movie. I mean, just, saying it straight out there, there is the machine itself drugs the woman, the scientist, estranged wife, and this all happens without her consent. She does not choose any of this stuff. What ends up happening toward the end of the movie is, I think, one of the sort of it's I will say that this is one of the most disturbing ideas. The newborn actually grows. There is an odd sense of computer behavior to it, um to the infant, and the whole filming of the sequences where we're supposed to be understanding that this child is growing are so disturbing and so oddly shot that it gives you this sort of like, oh my gosh, I'm in an alternate reality sort of feel. And for that, I give it a lot of props. It definitely was very different. But I feel like this is 100% right in the 70s genre style, both exploitation and, hey, we're hedging on serious problems with technology, we can't really trust it, and but yes, we need it because look, it cured leukemia and those kinds of things. So I would say that this is, I don't want to say that it was a great movie, but it was definitely a movie worth seeing. This was 1977. It was called The Demon Seed. It was actually based on a novel. And it was also based on a book by Dean Koontz. So added prop. If you like Dean Koontz, you really might like this.
Okay. Okay. It's not one that I've seen, but it feels like it's right on the periphery of something I might have seen.
Yeah, I mean, it has some camp elements to it at this point because the special effects are not as brilliant as perhaps we would like them to be, but it's amazing in uh it's amazing in its affect, I think, and the questions that it presents. And Dean Koontz is, aside from Stephen King, I think one of my favorite sort of like, question the unknown kind of authors.
Hmm.
So I feel like that might be why it translated so well.
Okay. Okay. Well then, my number six. And I'm sorry, but this is kind of where I cheated a little bit.
Okay. Is it really a 1980s film? But you just
No, no,
okay.
it's it follows all the criteria for the most part. It doesn't exactly start out on Earth, but it like gets there immediately. So I was worried a little bit. One, because I like I said, my pickings weren't plentiful, but I absolutely feel like maybe because 99% of the movie takes place on Earth, it should count. So hopefully you'll be down for this one. In 1978, people believed a man could fly. Talking about Superman from Richard Donner. And yes, it starts off on the planet Krypton, but like I said, we get to Earth really quick. And quite frankly, in this particular um, year, in this particular day and age, I really wanted to stress a couple of important things when it comes to Superman and the mythos, and the fact that your topic kind of led me into being able to talk about this is all all the better. Um, what can I say? Christopher Reeve, he embodied what Superman was in this movie. You know, he's mild mannered Clark Kent. He's as Superman. He's fun. He's not mopey. He is Superman. He's got a smirk. He's got the little curl. Superman is freaking Superman in this movie. And you know what he does as Superman in this movie? He stops not one, but two uh, nuclear issues, um, helps with an earthquake and a busted dam. He's just all over the place doing what Superman does, and that's saving people. That is who Superman is. He saves people. No questions asked. He just does it. And comparatively speaking to what we have seen in recent years, this I don't know who wrote this. It's not attributed, but they say that during the climax where Superman has his big loss, and he remembers Jor-El's warning of not to manipulate human history, but instead, well, he ignores that and takes Jonathan Kent's words to heart, and that there must be a reason, for him to be there, to help humanity, and that is the Jonathan Kent that I think everybody knows, the one that teaches his son Clark to be above all else just a good person, to help people. And I don't know how often I can stress that helping part of Superman. It seems like so insane to imagine a world where you have to remind people of what Superman's purpose is when it comes to film. Now, Richard Donner is a very, very good director, and he showed off a lot of those chops in this movie because I'm going to say it, the special effects hold up, the performances, yeah, yeah, I'm going to say it, the performances hold up, and it's a movie with Christopher Reeve, Brando, Gene Hackman. It did everything right as far as casting goes, and the reason why it's only my number 6 is because I thought maybe it wasn't even though it was off planet for just a tiny bit of time. Um, I thought that might have tainted the the uh, the list just a tad bit, so I dropped it down a few notches because overall it is still a wonderful movie, and I think if you haven't seen the 1978 Superman, and you're, a young Superman fan that has only seen something like Man of Steel, give it a shot. Give it a shot. You'll see the demeanor that, you know the Kryptonian Boy Scout is supposed to have, and how he feels about humanity. That's what you're going to take away from 1978 Superman, and that's why it's my number six. I think it's great. Absolutely wonderful.
Oops. If I could just add one small thing to this. Superman in the early days, I should say. I don't know how to say this. This movie was sort of made before we had a lot of tie-ins to either the DC universe or the Marvel universe or any of that stuff. I mean, we had
Hmm.
some small things, but not a lot. And Superman kind of took on a life of his own, I think heavily influenced by the 1950s serial Superman, which, you know, kind of formed the Clark Kent on screen persona. Because, of course, we always had the comics. But the on screen persona of Clark Kent was very much emulated, I think, by Christopher Reeves. And one of the things that I truly appreciate about this movie was the fact that Superman was at all times a protector of humanity. There was no ambiguity about him being a protector. Yes, there were, I think, moral dilemmas that he faced, and certainly the stakes felt very high. But the idea that he would let a human suffer, especially needlessly, was absolutely out of the question. And somehow, over decades, we lost sight of that, became jaded, and started to make Superman into a little bit of uh a-hole. Like not a protector of humanity, but a superhero with a chip on his shoulder. And I have never liked that. I'm sometimes stunned when I go back and watch the Man of Steel sort of stuff progressing, because it feels to me like Superman doesn't care. I mean, he cares about the people that he cares about, but he's more like a gangster than he is the magnanimous, benevolent superhero that has nothing but love and generosity. And I feel like Christopher Reeves really emulates that. There's not a, you know, I never get the impression from the Christopher Reeves Superman that there is even a single malicious bad intention in his body. Yes, he can get angry, and yes, he can do things that upend um and there's that, but he's so good. He's so wholesome, and I have to say I love that. I absolutely feel like that is Superman. Superman is good. Truth, justice, and the American way, as they talk about in the 1950s TV serial, is kind of like the right sort of catchphrase for Superman, I feel like, to have. And we just veered so far away from that. Anyway, I really like it. And I loved Christopher Reeve. God rest him. Okay. My number six pick. This is a movie that I think probably a good portion of people have seen or heard of in some way. This movie was apparently, I didn't even know this until I went back and was like looking at stuff about this movie. It was inspired in part by a Ray Bradbury story. It morphed and took a whole bunch of turns because apparently the rights to that particular story had already been under contract, and so they weren't able to do what they wanted to do. But somehow they made a movie that is both what we were talking about before, cheesy cinema, and also high stakes. And it felt scary in the most ridiculous ways. I mean, there are shots in this movie that are just of a building, and they're terrifying. And every time I see that building in any capacity, I'm terrified. I'm like, oh, I'm never going in there. Um, my biggest fear after I saw this movie, irrational as it is, was walking into any mausoleum for any reason at all. This particular movie is called, it was released in 1978. No, I'm sorry, 1979. And it was called Phantasm. For people that don't know, basically the story of Phantasm is there are beings from another dimension. I think we can safely say. I feel like in later versions they kind of made it seem like maybe they were from another world, like another planet. But I think that in the original version it feels a little bit more like they're interdimensional creatures. And they run a funeral home, and the people who die, they basically take their bodies and they turn them, they squish them into these little tiny creatures. And the little tiny creatures then go about and do the bidding of, well, who they call the tall man. But apparently they're also being sent through this interdimensional portal, which is two giant tuning forks in this one room, and they are basically building some kind of army out of them. Um, it certainly doesn't dwell in the in that region, right? It dwells in the characters becoming more and more suspicious of what's going on at the funeral home and what is really happening. There is a weapon that the tall man can use that is this steel rotating ball. And as it gets close to you, it extends these stainless steel and whatever forks that jam into your head. Scariest stuff, I swear. And and so everybody is, when you see the ball, oh, something really bad is going to happen. The tall man himself is absolutely frightening. He actually is just an enormous person. I mean, enormous as in tall. And his on-screen presence is just terrifying. It's just terrifying. um there's only a couple of small locations in this movie, and the thread of the movie is simplistic. It's just a very basic kind of story going on here. But the theme of this movie, which I feel like is a theme that we could easily just pick up and put into a movie today: older people don't listen to younger people. And sometimes, if you listen, you'll hear something that perhaps could be very important. That's one aspect. The other aspect, I think, is our preoccupation with, especially in the 70s, uh, this sort of idea that perhaps spirituality and what happens to us after we die is kind of um, something different than what we thought it was. We can maybe move to another dimension. There was a lot of Shirley MacLaine stuff. There was a lot of sort of like the beginnings of new agey ideas. And this whole concept of interdimensional portaling was, I think, brilliantly done by creating this room, which with the tuning forks, which is kind of like a sound room. So the opening the portal was by hitting certain notes or hitting a certain note and having that resonant hum happen. The special effects were actually quite interesting. They weren't fabulous, but they do basically stand up because a lot of them were just super practical effects. And it's the camera work in this movie that absolutely makes it just a perfect pick for a 1979 movie. There are so many running track scenes where the camera is following something, and especially the mausoleum scenes, it feels so much like you are being chased. Really good stuff. I liked it a lot. In fact, a lot of this movie is about running from one place to another. But really scary stuff. I absolutely love this movie and think it absolutely fits in this 1970s genre while still having some sci-fi aspects to it. So Phantasm 1979 is my pick for number 6.
Not one I've seen,
And I
but
should ask, have you
one I've
seen
heard of.
Phantasm, Josh?
I have not. It has not come across my my watching, unfortunately.
Josh.
I'm here. I'm here. I guess you can't hear me.
Okay.
Yeah, everything sounds good on my end. And we lost Jen. Let's see if this works.
Okay. As always, my equipment needs to fail at least once per podcast, so hopefully that was the requisite once and everything will be fine now.
Hopefully, because well, yeah, yeah. Hopefully, just the once.
Let's hope. We'll cross my fingers.
So we're going to the top five, huh?
Top 5. Have you
Top
seen
five.
Phantasm, by the way? Did you
I
see?
have not seen
Did
Phantasm,
Okay. I just had to ask.
but it sounds interesting, and I've heard of it. So I have that going for me so far. I have that
And
going for me.
there are so many movies after Phantasm which basically, start to like expand all this lore. Some of it
Mhm.
gets really ridiculous, but it's still fun. I mean, even the stuff that is like really terrible is still fun. So I'll give the franchise that.
Okay. Well, it'll probably make it onto my list soon enough. It's already on my watch list. I know that, but hopefully I can get it in front of my eyeballs pretty soon.
Awesome.
So my number five, I'm going to keep things um, pretty quick here because again, it's something we've talked about before, and I'd hate to think somebody's tuning in and hearing us rehash the same talking points from movies, just trying to keep things a little fresh, much like they did last year. Last year, when this movie is set, the the movie was made in 1973. It's set in 2022.
Oh no.
It's Soylent Green.
Oh no.
What's wrong?
I could not bring myself to pick this movie.
Why not?
I couldn't because despite the fact that I picked other cheesy movies on my list, this movie has got to be one of the most overacted movies I think I can remember seeing.
It's people.
I mean, everything in this movie is so over the top acted. But it is a good movie. Okay, continue.
The only thing I'm going to say that we probably haven't touched on before is um, when they go to the clinic and sitting in the chair and the music is playing and the beautiful imagery is shown. That is, I don't know, that is just a scene that strikes a major chord with me. You know, the I don't know what the proper word is to describe how the the finality of life versus the beauty of life going on at the same time, one watching the other.
Mm.
That's something that hits really close to home for some reason. I don't know. I always get the feels on that particular scene. But overall, it is, I'd say, a classic. Uh, we'll say a classic cheesy film because, quite frankly, that's what it is. And it's definitely worth every second that is spent watching it. So if you haven't watched Soylent Green, uh, get on it. It's definitely something that should be experienced before you know you you become dinner.
This is another movie from the 70s that deals specifically, I think, with a 70s theme, which is lack of resources, which people were very concerned about. And I just remembered that there is another aspect to the 70s which was sort of on everybody's mind, and that was sort of this idea of runaway inflation, and nobody was going to be able to afford food anymore, and the world was going to come to a screeching halt because of it. And I feel like Soylent Green really captures that feeling of, oh, the world has such limited resources, we're going
Oh
to end
yeah.
up eating people. Yeah. So
And that big reveal at the end. It's sorry for
I-
the spoilers, but I mean, quite frankly, it's so ingrained into pop culture at this point. You should know. Like if you've watched The Simpsons, you know what it is.
exactly.
All right, you're number 5.
Okay, my number 5 is, and I feel like I've talked about this movie before, although I don't know if I've talked about it here, so we'll just recap it real briefly because I think everybody knows this movie. It's The Island of Dr. Moreau. The Island of Dr. Moreau is, I don't I am struggling actually to explain how awesome that I found this movie. I almost feel like this should have been um a pick. Oh, wait a minute. I think I'm in the wrong list. I'm so sorry. Okay. I am in the wrong list. Although Dr. Moreau is a fabulous movie. Actually, I chose this movie and then realized that there's a 1970s edition or rendition of this and not the version that I thought it was. So I took it off the list, and this is where I put Mad Max. So Mad Max is actually on this list at number 5. We've already talked about it, so I actually don't even need to talk about it at all.
Okay, absolutely crushed it.
All right. So you are at number 4.
Number 4. My number 4 is from 1977, and I think for those of you that know me, you should kind of expected it to be on the list. But 1977, Steven Spielberg released Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This is one of those movies that is about aliens, but it's not about aliens. That's, I think, what sets it apart than most of these like science fiction films, especially of the time. What instead you have is the story of just this guy, uh, Roy. He's just a guy, but he his life becomes inexplicably intertwined with the aliens. Essentially, I mean, they aren't really there, but they're always there. And I'm not really sure I'm explaining that correctly. He becomes so hyper focused on these feelings, these instincts, that his behavior changes, and his family is, kind of like they're kind of going mad because they think he's losing his mind, and it results in this big trip to I really don't want to go into spoiler territory here, but big trip, huge location, iconic in every sense of the word. When when we get to the kind of the meaning of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and everything that entails. Steven Spielberg at the time was he's not Steve he wasn't Steven Spielberg just yet. He wasn't the guy that we know now that basically can do virtually, I say virtually, nothing wrong. This was only his what second or third major film. This was
Yeah.
definitely before he had, decades worth of credits behind him, and the fact that he was able to take this story, kind of like Jaws, where you don't see the shark for quite a while, but it builds the anticipation, and in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you don't see really what is causing the stuff that's going on for him, but it's building this underlying tension to where you'd know it's there. So he kind of kept on a theme for the suspense, and like Jaws, it culminates into a wonderful release, um, and memorable moments. Some of the most memorable, in film history that this guy, brings us. So to go from, excuse me, 2 years earlier, Jaws, the birth of the summer blockbuster, and 2 years later, he's able to make this sort of subdued alien film when for the past what 20, 30 years when it comes to alien movies it's all very over the top bleep blop or just vicious earth destroyers, whatever the case may be. This was, I think, a different take at the time, and Steven Spielberg really left his fingerprints on alien on cinematic alien history with this one, and that's why it's my number four.
Nice. Also, catchiest theme ever. Um, Basic tonal notes, and I even learned the sign language that went along with it. I loved that film. Absolutely loved it. Devil's Tower is now incredibly iconic simply because of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Um, okay. My number also, just by the way, I saw that movie in a drive-in theater and was so mesmerized that I felt like I had to see it again. So I did. But I was, God, that movie was crazy. Okay. My number my number let's see. My number 4. I'm at number 4. Okay. My number 4 is a movie called The Andromeda Strain. Um oh boy. Okay. This movie had a major impact on me because I read it before I saw this. Um, the Andromeda Strain is a this is one of those movies that sort of veers in territory like, okay, the main character okay, let's start over. The Andromeda Strain was written by Michael Crichton, the same man of Jurassic Park fame. Um, what makes the Andromeda Strain, I think, so interesting is and I'm going to talk about the movie because I there's a lot that happens in the book that clearly doesn't happen in the movie, and they condense and consolidate so much that yeah, you don't really get the biggest fullest picture, but let's go with it. um First thing that I love about this movie are the special effects. The special effects for Andromeda Strain are amazing. Um they were done by a man named Douglas Thurnbull, I believe. And it is it's some of the aspects in this film feel very off because they use split screen, but they do it so effectively that it becomes part of the cinematic experience. I really, really loved that. Um, I guess, the best way to describe sort of what happens in the Andromeda Strain is scientific hubris sort of doesn't work. Um, I think, there's a lot of things that I actually don't want to give a lot away about this movie because I feel like this is one of those movies that you would really love if you see it and don't know a lot about it. Um, but I will say that there is a kind of virus involved, and what they think originally is going on is actually not a. I mean, well, I should say they think it's a virus. It's actually not. It's an alien organism. I guess I'd say. And it does things to people. It contaminates the people that are originally infected with it, and then as they come down, as they basically as they meet up with other people, crazy stuff begins to happen. Um, this is one of those movies, though, that I think has both the scientific kind of preoccupation with what else is happening out there in the universe and how it could adversely affect us. It also feels oddly like it's a little bit, you know, paranoia, but also at the same time, just coming off of our, visits to the moon and plans to go explore the universe in some ways, we very much felt, I think, at that particular time that the universe was maybe a lot more hostile than we anticipate. You have Close Encounters on Josh's pick that is, hey, the aliens are actually friendly and they want to meet us, and we're misunderstanding what it is that they're trying to do. And then you have things like the Andromeda strain where it's like, oh, okay, maybe it's not like overtly hostile, but this is really dangerous to play with. Um, there's some really interesting aspects to the Andromeda strain, which oddly remind me of the way that we handle COVID, which is crazy. Um, but lots of really cool kind of, undeveloped, but very like, yeah, we're thinking about these ideas in science. Um, it doesn't stand up very well to today's science, but it does, I think, really show where people were in the 70s in terms of their thinking with the science fiction, or with the science and the fiction being a part of narrative storytelling. Like, here's some people that were affected by this, but the real story is not just how they were affected by it, but what they do in response. How does everybody respond to this? And it's sort of crazy. There's so much that's happening here, and so many things that we don't really understand. That it could be that it could actually be the alien pathogen, but I feel like we leave everything so open in this movie that, like, maybe there's something else happening here. Like maybe there's a bigger picture to be had. The other thing that I really like about this movie is I really loved the fact that w- in the 70s especially, there was a kind of a love-hate relationship with science. Yes, we love our science, but no, we actually also kind of hate it. So anyway, so that gets my number 4 pick, the Andromeda strain, and that was released, I believe, in 19 was it 1970? It was 1970. Oh no, it was 1971. 1971. So early 70s.
Like a lot of people in the '90s, had myself a big old Michael Crichton kick. So I wound up reading a lot of his books back when I was
Oh,
in high
cool.
school, and that was one of them. So haven't seen the movie, but I'm gonna give myself half a point for that.
There's actually a remake to this movie as well, just so
I
you know.
heard.
Yeah. So, and I think that the remake did something a little bit different, fun but different.
Well, different doesn't always have to be bad, and especially if it's fun. So there you go.
Yeah, it was good, but it wasn't the same. Like if you want to see what I think the yeah, I should bring this up right now. Just hold on for 1 second. Also, during the 1970s, and this is something that I think actually we could take note of today. Adaptations in the 70s were far more. ugh, um, Look, we have a book to tell, so we're going to try to hit the high points. And maybe we're not going to get them all, but we're going to try to hit the high points. We have gotten to the point in adaptations where adaptations are almost fan fiction material based on the source of a book. And I do feel like it's worth mentioning that that is why a lot of source material that was an adaptation from a book in the 70s and even in the 80s was a lot more faithful to the original source than we see in the 90s and the 2000s and then, our 2010 and 20 decades. We just don't do that anymore. We have a much more loose and fast affiliation with source material, and we don't play the same kinds of ways that we used to, bringing things to screen. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Another excellent point, especially since we both are avid readers as well as movie fans. It can sometimes be frustrating to see that the two mediums don't always play nice together.
No, no, they really don't. And sometimes I think the a movie viewer who really loves a particular adaptation is perhaps disappointed by what it actually is, and vice versa, obviously. So yeah, I mean, I think it runs both ways.
Absolutely. Are we ready for my number three?
We're ready. Go.
All right. In 1979, Nicholas Meyer gave us a movie called Time After Time. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this, the story is, I'm just going to say it's pretty awesome. Okay. It involves H.G. Wells, who actually builds the time machine from his, story, The Time Machine. And Jack the Ripper steals it and goes to 1970s San Francisco. Well, he doesn't go there per se. It's the time machine is moved there as part of a tribute to H.G. Wells. And so when they time travel to the 70s, because HG goes after him, of course, because he has to stop him from wreaking havoc on what he thought would be a utopian future. We'll finally be beyond wars. So that was his goal. He thought he was a man before his time, and and in a lot of ways, kind of. But Jack the Ripper, his his whole mentality was no, no, people are like me, and that's where you're wrong because they're friends. And of course, H.G. Wells doesn't know he's Jack the Ripper. Anyway, I'm telling the whole story here. That's not what I'm trying to do. But naturally, it's the 70s, so there's going to be a love interest for H.G. Wells and someone to, I guess, be in peril, a reason for him to want to fight Jack the Ripper in a sense. And the thing about this is it could have easily just gone a straight, this is a fish out of water comedy. And don't get me wrong, the stuff where H.G. Wells is going around San Francisco and he's just like, I don't know what anything is. It's great. Absolutely. Love it. But it also takes itself a bit seriously too, to actually take the time to really tell I'd say a good story about time travelers. Even if one of them had the best of intentions, he's got to come to realize sometimes bad things happen even with the best of intentions. So, yeah, that's basically what the movie's about. It's got an awesome young Mary Steenburgen in it, and it's the second movie that I remember her from that involves uh, heavy influence in plot by a science fiction author. The other one, of course, being Back to the Future Part 3, where she has a fascination with Jules Verne, same as Dr. Emmett L. Brown. But that's a story for another time. Time After Time is. I watched it again. It was one of the movies that I watched this year. And I read the premise and I'm like, I love time travel. Time travel is like my favorite thing when it comes to stories. And the funny the funny bit is when I watched this, I realized I've seen this before. I might have been like 7 years old, but I've seen this before. And, sometimes something happens so far back where you only have bits of, you know, flashes of memory of this thing that you can't really place. You know that you saw it, you don't know what it is, but you know the imagery. And this is one of those things. So finally being able to kind of put those images to an actual film title, it felt like closure in a way, and I was very, very glad to be able to do that. Anyway, back to the movie. It was, like I said, a an enjoyable watch for me. It was the first movie I watched of this new year, and when it comes to science fiction, you will never ever go wrong, in my humble opinion, by using science uh, and time travel. Throwing it together and just making a really cool little adventure slash mystery, I guess, because HG is trying to figure out what's going on. It's a fun movie, and that's why it's my number three.
Okay. I actually do like that movie. I feel like that was also a good choice. Um, okay, my number three movie. Oh, mine. Yeah, okay, my number three movie.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I was getting confused because I have two that I have similar things to say about. In 1973, a movie was released called The Crazies, and The Crazies it had a remake. That was I would say fairly successful remake. Um, and was pretty good. I actually liked the later remake. But if you watch the 1973 The Crazies, a very similar thing happens, where there is basically this substance that turns people into zombies. Now, it was directed by George A. Romero, um, and it stars Lane Carroll and Will McMillian. Um, this movie is a bit different from um, the remake. So if you've only seen the remake, it's kind of worth it to watch the original because I feel like this has more of the George A. Romero flair to it. George A. Romero is absolutely the king of zombie behavior and culture. And this definitely, it falls in line with that, but also, I think, launched 1,000 tropes. We don't recognize them anymore as coming from the crazies because we just don't see it there. But so many modern zombie movies sort of fall into some of these trope lines. Um, so what happens is um, there there a lot of things in the beginning feel a bit like a Night of the Living Dead kind of setup. There are there's this like army presence. Um, a a plane crash lands, and apparently it was carrying some kind of bioweapon, and it infects the entire town's water supply. And the um I believe, like in, although I don't know if they mention it in the remake, but it has a code name. The code name is Trixie, and basically it infects everybody in the town. And it affects people in the town a little bit differently. Like each person kind of responds a little bit differently. Um, they become homicidal, they become crazy and hysterical, as the name mentions. Um, and there's a lot of, as people become infected, people, end up not knowing what's really going on because it's kind of slow at first. And then when you find out what's really going on, it's terrifying because you realize that basically almost everyone has been infected. A couple of people kind of escape, and they had put everybody into quarantine. When they escape, some other things happen along the way, and they have to kind of figure out what's going on. And it becomes pretty clear eventually that this is not going to be contained to just our small town in Evans City, Pennsylvania. Um, there is, I believe in this one, there's a potential cure, but it ends up that the cure is kind of demolished because the townspeople who are infected basically stampede and break free from quarantine, and all of a sudden they're kind of out and about. It's kind of a it's one of those, like, it's inevitable, but watching it unfold is like watching a train wreck happen. um I really love this movie for a number of different reasons. One, again, George A. Romero was just on top of his game in the 70s. Everything from the lighting in this movie to the cinema is really epically done. I also love the zombie kind of design. That it's not quite Night of the Living Dead. You're not dealing with people that have been decomposing for a long time. You're just dealing with extremely hysterical, crazy, homicidal people. And so you get a little bit more of the, up close and personal feeling. And all these people exist in this small town, so they all know each other, and it creates just unbelievably sort of heartbreaking but also insanely over the top interpersonal dramas. I definitely think that this movie deserves a high spot on the list. Number one, because this, again, the cinematography, and I love the lighting, but two, the screenplay for this just seems to follow such a perfect formula. And I know a lot of movies after The Crazies tried to emulate kind of this type of tone. And I don't feel like they ever actually got there, but they developed, sort of like splinter ideas off of this particular film. So for my for my number three spot, The Crazies from 1970. What did I say? This was 1973, I believe. George A. Romero has to have a spot on my list. So there you go. That's my number three.
Then I guess I haven't seen the original Crazies, but I have seen the
Did I
remake.
lose you again?
No, I'm here, but you, uh, I guess, technical difficulties again.
I think I did.
Yep. So we're gonna try that again with Jen. Sorry, folks. Second bit.
One more time. Apparently that was the second time. Where
Second
did
time.
where did that leave off?
No, you were here the whole time.
Oh, okay.
You just
Well,
couldn't hear me. Everybody
that
can
was
hear
what was going
you,
on.
but you just couldn't hear me.
Darn it! I hate it when that happens. Okay. I'm not ignoring you, I promise. It's just technology.
I was just saying I haven't seen the original Crazies, but I did see the remake.
And I mean, the remake does a fairly good job of following the Romero um, idea. In terms of the adaptation. It kind of works. I mean, there's a lot of differences, but Timothy Oliphant crushes it in that. I mean, I love him in that particular movie. But the original has a kind of George A. Romero charm that is just different. I mean, you can really see it in his directorial style. You can really tell the difference. So if you like George Romero, you should really watch the original.
I do dig some Romero on occasion.
Yeah.
Well, you ready for my number two?
Number two.
The movie's so good that it couldn't be number one. Okay, I guess that wasn't as funny as I thought in my head.
Okay, now it was funny because now that you thought it was funny and it wasn't funny, now it's hilarious. Yes, go ahead.
Been there a lot. My my number two, also brought to us by a a lot would say legendary director. I'm not inclined to disagree with that statement. I've seen quite a few of his films, this being one of them. I'm talking about Stanley Kubrick in 1971's A Clockwork Orange.
Mm. That almost made my list.
Well, then you know exactly. Of course, you've seen A Clockwork Orange. I know I'm not bringing anything new to the table for you this week, but you know that when it comes to style, A Clockwork Orange has it in spades. The iconic look of the Droogs and the music throughout. It's all very memorable. I guess you could say Stanley Kubrick has a way of tying all of your senses into a scene. Um, well, I guess not smell, but sometimes I feel like I can smell things. That's just how good he is sometimes. And there are, there's a lot of conversation about this movie, about what it may or may not glorify, or some of the messages or the imagery that it sends. It's To me, it's always been about, one, free will, and what you choose to do and how you choose to do it, whether or not that should be, ever impeded. Um, and also, as what the minister points out, sometimes goodness is it's great. Being a good person is great, but it has to come from the person and not from the programming. I think it's really the point that is trying to be gotten to, and to see the transition of a violent, horny, young man, and watch his watch his mind just not be changed, because it's not, but it's sort of programmed, not sort of, it literally is programmed to hate the things that he loved before, because it would make him a better fit for society. And there are a lot of deep questions here that would, take not just an entire podcast, but probably an entire series of podcasts to accurately break down, all of these different discussions that get brought up in this film. But I will say that the the science fiction of programming people, and really really focusing on the aggressors rather than the victims, like a lot of films do. Focus on the victims, and how they get their revenge, and how the aggressors get their comeuppance. To kind of flip that around, um, and follow the mentality of the opposite side you're used to, is one of the reasons why A Clockwork Orange stands alone in a lot of ways, and makes it truly unique in cinema. And I don't just mean the point of view from an antagonist or anything like that, but I mean to really bear down on people that are doing no good just for the sake of doing no good, in hardly even a comical way, just really bad stuff. Um, sets a tone and tells a story that I'm hard pressed to even think of someone that tried to truly emulate it to this day. And that's why Clockwork Orange is my number two.
All right. That is a good choice. I feel like that is definitely a masterpiece of the 1970s, and Stanley Kubrick definitely has sort of almost a lock on a lot of really excellent cinema in the 60s and the 70s. But I will say that a Clockwork Oranging. Oh my gosh, I think I need more coffee. Clockwork Orange has the effect on people even to this day that they are deeply disturbed and troubled by it. And the cinematic themes in there, including rape and a lot of extremely difficult topics to deal with, are harsh. They're extremely harsh. It makes epic science fiction, though. I mean, it really does. And I do sometimes think it's amazing where, when I look back at all of these films, we have come so far from that kind of stuff, and yet A Clockwork Orange still has such a profound impact on people. Okay, my number 2 movie is a movie that I think personally is the epitome of 1970s films. Um, this movie did not get very good ratings, and even still, people, it has its own cult following, but people aren't, exactly like, oh, yay, we're gonna go watch this movie. Um, it gets like 30% on, or 30 something percent on Rotten Tomatoes, and even Metacritic doesn't have it coming in very high. But I feel like this movie is definitely the 70s right up in front. It's called Battle for the Planet of the Apes, not Return. Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Um, and part of the reason that I think that this movie has such an interesting aspect is, first of all, we know that Planet of the Apes is actually Earth. We know that the apes themselves are really the evolution of humanity, which is also super interesting. Um, but we find out that um, there is something absolutely insidious happening with the control of the armies, the different factions, and of course, there's all of the kind of really good and yet really terrible ideas of bringing to light racism and prejudice, and the chimps don't trust the gorillas and the gorillas don't trust anybody. There's militants, there's the peacemakers, there's all kinds of stuff, and meanwhile humans are kind of bumped into a nothing. It's all very, I think, fascinating by itself, just in terms of the mythology for Planet of the Apes. But what I think makes this so 70s on point is the idea that we somehow created an entire race, I guess that's the best way to say it, or races, in order to show how ridiculous our own human behaviors can be, made it impactful, and while being entertaining. And part of me feels like that was the true gift of the 70s. The true gift of the 70s was sort of putting everything out in plain sight for us to be entertained by, while basically chastising us and saying, you fools, why are you doing this? Here's the results. You can see it pretty clearly. And, in some ways, a lot of science fiction in the 1970s that we brought to film really had that kind of, you know, shame aspect to it, like, pay attention or these bad things are going to happen. It wasn't quite so hopeful, a note like the later 1980s and even into the 90s were with, hey, space exploration could be great and we could go do fabulous things, and on the planet, in science fiction, we could cure world hunger, we could do without soil and green, we could do amazing things. So I'm choosing this movie because, and it gets a very high mark for me, because I think that it, above all other movies except for my number one pick, really gives us this idea of what it was like to live in the 70s altogether. Not that there were a bunch of monkeys running around, but that we were factioned, that we were militant. Oh, wait a minute, is that today? I mean, the lessons from these movies really transport, they really transcend the time period from the 70s even into today. But in the 70s, I feel like it was really punctuated by our fiction, whereas today we kind of move a little bit away from that. We're a lot more nuanced about our criticism of society. And for that, I think we owe a great deal of respect for just being so forthright and out there, but also Planet of the Apes. I don't know how you go wrong with Planet of the Apes. It's just a good franchise. And this particular one, I think, really works in exposing all of our weaknesses. So, number 2, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Oh,
Okay.
I just said it again. I didn't mean beneath. Battle for the Planet of the Apes. I meant to say battle and I said beneath.
I don't remember if this is one that I've seen. I know I haven't seen
Um,
them all.
this is, let's see if I can give you a um let's see if I can give you something that you might remember. Well, there's a big war in this one between the military factions and kind of like the scientists. No, not
Maybe.
striking a.
Maybe. What year was it?
This one was 1973, I believe. There's mutant humans in this one. So
I
it's not quite the same as some of the other ones where we just have like, basic humans that are sort of not, they're just like normal humans. This one has mutant humans in it.
no, I don't think I have seen this one.
Oh, okay. Well, this one is definitely worth seeing. Um but it's not it I would say that it's not on the it does have a grand scale, but it's a different grand scale than the other movies. The other movies are a lot more entertaining, I think, because they are not as, like I said, they're not as like shame inducing. Like it kind of feels bad in some ways to watch this movie and realize that, oh, God, this is actually how we behave. Because it's just so called out. In some of the other movies, it's a lot more entertaining because it kind of feels like we're little bit more removed from who the apes are, and it's like not quite as like in your face. So I do think it's worth watching.
Seems I've seen the one before it. Conquest of the
Conquest
Battle
of the Planet of
of
the
the Planet of the
Apes.
Apes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the one I've seen.
that's a good one. There's another one in this series where they actually are worshiping an atomic weapon. And I think that that is Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And that one also is very 70s in its tone because, again, atomic weapons, radiation, there's like this cult behavior around the atomic bomb itself. But they don't recognize it as being an atomic bomb because it's too far into the future. They don't understand it. But the humans that do recognize it are like, "Are you crazy?" So there's a lot of good 70s themes in the Planet of the Apes franchise that are infinitely worth exploring.
Well, I'm gonna. Yeah, my number one. Are you ready?
I am so ready.
Okay. We mentioned earlier, at the top that thought there might be some crossover, and so far, just the one. I've only had the one crossover,
That's right.
and it would be crazy if our second crossover was both of our number ones. I doubt it, but it would be crazy. But my number one is from 1975, directed by Paul Bartel, produced by Roger Corman. Death Race 2000.
Ooh, good choice.
The first time I saw this movie, I absolutely fell in love. It's about a cross country race in a sort of dystopian America set in the year 2000, where The idea is, you want to get points, right? It's not just a race to get to the next place quickest. No, you get points. And how do you get points? By running over the citizens. And you would think, what wouldn't that start a panic in the streets? Well, not in the way you'd think, because the people are totally down for it. They line up. They're elderly, they're sick, and sometimes just people they don't like to be run over by their favorite racers. And all of this is, like you said before, there were a lot of running themes, and one of those, overpopulations, lack of resources. So people got to find a way to thin the herd, so to speak. And
Corporate greed.
yeah, there you go. And the government came up with this road race where well, we're just going to run over the people. And depending on the type of
Ah.
person you run over, you get an allotment of points. But of course, it wouldn't just be in my opinion, the greatest 70s sci-fi film if it was just that. No, of course, there's some complexity, some layers. There's some anti-government stuff going on. It's rebellion in the midst of the race, as they're trying to sort of fight back against what's going on. And it becomes sort of the lead, David Carradine, Frankenstein, becomes sort of a rallying point for the people, because he is, the people's racer, and has been through many a battle in the cars. By the way, the cars, amazing. It's I can't think of anything before this that you really saw where the driver's personality is sort of reflected in like their vehicle, like it was optimized for a
Road Warrior.
specific.
Mad Max.
Well, that was 79.
I know.
This was 75.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So if you get a chance, Google, just watch the movie. Watch the movie Death Race 2000.
It's so
And
good.
if you want to see a young Sylvester Stallone,
And a young David Carradine.
a young David Carradine, it's amazing from start to finish. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give you this little tidbit. You can watch it on Tubi. There you go. I'm giving you a place to watch it. If you haven't seen it, I'm begging you, watch Death Race 2000. And not, one of the reasons why I didn't think the remake worked uh, at all was because they took away one of the most fun aspects, which was a cross country race where people run over, the citizens. Instead, it's like this, oh, we're going to race around the prison. Not nearly as fun. I'm just gonna put it there. Unless pedestrians are being hit, it's just not nearly as fun. So, Death Race 2000 is the number one sci-fi film from the 70s, Earthbound period. And I
Yeah.
think it's going to be your number one too.
So okay. So here's something that's interesting.
Okay.
Um. In I'm gonna say that a lot of the movies that we chose would definitely cut for Mystery Science Theater 3000. I mean, they could definitely be Mystery Science Theater
Mm-hmm.
fodder. But that doesn't make them any less relevant or kind of interesting in their own right. And I say that because sometimes I think that we see cheesy movies with, weird special effects and we go, that's awful. And we relegate it to some kind of vault where we will never think about it again, um, or make fun of it and mock it. And and I think that there's a place for that because I love Mystery Science Theater, so bring it on. But I also think that sometimes, like, you have to look at the historical record of a film genre, especially during specific decades that, brought about certain types of tropes and changes and things, and really examine them for what they are. Which, again, you can think that they're funny and you can call them comedy, and sometimes they really are, sort of like campy B movies. But I feel like all the movies that we presented tonight definitely have a place in history, in cinema history especially, and they stand out as being really representative of this particular decade. So, again, I do feel like they were kind of crazy, but also really good. And to answer your question, ding ding ding, Death Race was actually my number one.
Wait, what?
And Death Race is my number one movie.
What?
Yeah, how about that? And this is why I chose Death Race as being, I think, one of
What?
the best 1970s movie. Um, First of all, I am no big fan of Sylvester Stallone. Um, but yeah, whatever. But that's personal. As an actor, Sylvester Stallone gets it a lot. He has an on-screen presence that jumps off the screen, and it makes you feel instantly connected in some way, whether that's good or whether it's bad. And that takes a lot of acting chops to get there. David Carradine, who I had only ever known from the Kung Fu series, absolutely crushes it as Frankenstein. And the whole idea behind the saga of Death Race, which continues on even to today, is not just the idea that, hey, there's corporations that are leading sort of the charge in changing how we feel, but it also, again, deals with the lack of resources, the hysteria over whether or not there are going to be too many people in the world, which was a real fear. I mean, they've had population counters forever, and at some point, one of the biggest, like, political sort of issues was, oh my god, the world is getting too populated and we're never going to be able to sustain all these people. Everybody is just going to die off in a mass extinction. And that particular piece, I think, was really well demonstrated in Death Race. But on top of that, Death Race, from a 70s perspective, has some of the best car chases that I think had been done since then, or up to then. You're right. Except that then we get to George Miller, and then everything, all bets are off. But in terms of what we get before that, the cinema in this is just absolutely awesome. I I will say that the dialogue in Death Race is not great. I mean, don't be looking for any, like, there's nothing super profound happening. But the profound, I think, thing that is happening is in the storyline. It's definitely in the actions and reactions that people have to what's going on. And the other reason that I love it is because in the 70s we had this very gray area, and it was a huge gray area. And I loved that about 70s cinema. Today we have a very black and white representation. If your protagonist is sort of like on the right side or on the wrong side. And that's why movies nowadays that do the crossover trick make us go, oh my God, I thought he was good and actually he was bad. Or I thought she was wonderful and actually she's horrible. In the 70s, there's this huge gray area where characters could exist as protagonists and antagonists, and there wasn't the same kind of well, I should say there was a big chunk of moral ambiguity attached to them. And I feel like that is kind of what happens in a lot of the Death Race movies. Yes, choices are made, and yes, we can see that there are some over the top villains, but then there's a lot of people that are just sort of stuck in these areas where they have to make these moral decisions that are horrific. They're terrible. And the original Death Race just does it so well. Really, really, really well. And I will definitely say that, like Josh said, um, the set and sets altogether, including inside the cars, are absolutely fabulous. I mean, you really feel like there is something very high stakes going on. You cannot watch this movie and feel like it's just you're just a passive observer. Everything feels like it's in your face. So, great choice for number one. That also was my number one, and I feel like this was a great list.
What?
Yeah.
How did that happen? That's never
Dig-
happened before.
I know, right? Good choice. Good choice.
Just to remind everybody, when Jen and I make our list, there's no, you know, chat about what we're doing. We're not dropping hints. We're not communicating about what's our on our list at all, other than to say, "Oh, I think you're gonna like my list," or um, "I'm like I'm pretty sure you're going to, you know, bring a powerful list," and that's pretty much the gist of it.
Yep.
And here we are, same number one.
Which decidedly, had a greater chance of happening simply because the list of science fiction films in the 70s that aren't in space, it's a smaller list than it's a smaller
That's
source than usual.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
But
But
even still, it's still pretty amazing.
on the same page.
Yeah. So
Wow.
do you want to go through your list and recap your top picks?
Sure, sure. My number 10 was gas, or it became necessary to destroy the world in order to save it. A 1970 Roger Corman film. Number 9, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes from John DeBello, 1978. Number 8, Mad Max, 1979, directed by George Romero. Wait, I mean Miller.
I know I made that mistake. Sorry.
Um, um, oh, I lost count now. Number 7. I can't count to 10. Number 7, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, directed by Jim Sharman, 1975. Number 6, 1978, directed by Richard Donner. It's Superman. Number 5, Soylent Green is People, 1973, directed by Richard Fleischer. Soylent Green. Number 4, 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, brought to us by Steven Spielberg, Fancy Frenchman. Number 3, Nicholas Meyer's Time After Time from 1979. Number 2, Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange from 1971. And number 1, directed by Paul Bartel, 1975's Death Race 2000. So that is my top 10. Jen, tell us how we got to your number 1.
Okay, my number 10 is split between Invasion of the Bee Girls and Empire of the Ants. Please go see Empire of the Ants. You'll love it. Number 9, Damnation Alley. Number 8, Blue Christmas. Has nothing to do with Christmas, but you'll love it anyway. Number 7, Demon Seed. Number 6, Phantasm. Number 5, Mad Max. Number 4, The Andromeda Strain. Number 3, The Crazies. Number 2, Battle for the Planet of the Apes. And number 1, Death Race.
How did we do that? How did we do that? Sorry. It's just I don't know if I'm going to be able to sleep tonight. That's so mind blowing. Ah, wow. Okay.
So what are
Okay.
we doing for next week?
Well, next week, I think next week's list is going to make you put on your thinking cap.
Oh.
And here is the reason why. Okay, let me be honest. I had a topic all ready to go, but next week I think I'm gonna. This is like a last second change up because next week will be the 11th. Correct.
Yep.
So next week is the 11th, and on the 16th, there's uh there's this guy who's got a birthday. It's me.
Yay.
I'm that guy. And I thought, you know what? We can go back to that other list anytime. So next week, rather than doing what I had written down, we're going to do something super self indulgent. In honor of me, we're going to do our top 10 movies from the year I was born, 1982.
Hmm. Well, that's going to be a small list.
It just needs to be 10.
Yeah. No, I'm saying there's going to be a small number. Um, do you have any parameters on this? Is there anything like um
You could say only movies that you might think I like.
yeah.
No, just
Um
from the year 1982
hmm.
for
So
my
would that
birthday.
include Okay, well, I think I have a good idea. Um and actually this sort of yeah, this kind of works with some other things. So, okay. All right, I got some ideas.
Like I said, it's incredibly self-indulgent. It doesn't follow any particular theme. I suppose I could have done best birthday movies, but I already said the 82 thing, so kind of wish I thought of the birthday thing first, to be honest. Um, so yeah, best movies from 1982. It looks like I already know what your number one is, but I'm not going to say it right now.
I can tell you right now that my number one movie is a foreign film.
Really?
So take with that what you may. Yep, most definitely. So when we get to announce our list, can we say they're here?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
awesome. You know, not foreshadowing anything. I'm just saying that might be appropriate. So,
Well, I know how you love to talk about the world according to Garp.
oh, yeah, that was such a good book. It was such a weird movie, but that was such a good book.
Yeah, just kind of randomly pulled that. Just trying to make yeah. So
Genius Robin Williams, by the way. Genius.
now I feel like I have to watch it.
Oh man, that was I mean, for what it was, Robin Williams just kicked it. And so did what's his name as the football player. Oh god, that was an interesting film. Very interesting.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out because I just looked at it randomly. I didn't know anything about the movie itself. I just yeah. Okay. Well,
My kid sometimes laughs at me and asks me if there are movies that I haven't seen. And the answer is yes, there's many, but I have seen a lot of movies. Ah, okay. All right.
That's
So,
weird about Letterboxd. I have I'm closing in on 2,500 movies lifetime that I remember,
mm,
but I'm pretty sure if you signed up and tried to um, not only find every movie you watched and give them a star rating, but accumulate them and make sure that everything is all proper, your number would absolutely destroy mine. But I would probably never hear from you again because it would take a very long time.
Also, I am a little bit older than you, Josh, so that may account for some of the movies that I have also seen uh, more. But also, I did go to school and studied filmmaking. And so
Mhm.
during that period, I was immersed in movies from the early period of movie making up until, the time that I was in college. So it was kind of a big deal. Yeah. And I mean, that's carried with me for my entire life.
Well, you know what carries with me?
What's that?
Wondering how to make a meal as it pertains to one of my favorite films. Like, if I wanted someone to tell me a recipe, if you will, for our favorite 1970s Earthbound sci fi movie, Death Race 2000, where would one get ideas for that?
Well, hey, I don't actually have one for Death Race 2000, although I will definitely consider putting something up. But I do have one for The Omega Man, which also was a 1970s science fiction movie, which was absolutely hilarious and also kind of fun. And The Omega Man, the recipe for that is the Omega symbol made of bread. And I did these really awesome marinara sauce in these little shots. It turned out so cute. So anyway, yes, you can head over to moviesandmeals.com. I have a little something for most things, even if your genre is not completely there with every movie that you want. Hey, send me a message and let me know what you'd like to see, and I'll try to get on it. Also, we have a lot of updating that we are still doing from the holidays, so just be patient. I'm getting there. You can also find me on Thursday nights, so tomorrow, and I am announcing this so that he has no chance to back out. I am going to have a special guest host, Kinte. My friend Kinte is going to join us on the show. We're going to talk about things that are happening in the year 2023. We're also going to talk about the continuing decline of the streaming services and why they are imploding so fast right now. And we're going to talk about some things that have been renewed, canceled, and that are just sort of upcoming. I think it's going to be a good show. I think we're going to actually cover a lot of ground, and maybe we'll, inject some ideas of shows that you hadn't even heard of that maybe you'll want to see. So join us for
Very
that
cool.
Thursday at 8:30.
Very, very cool.
Right here also on Watco Media, just, in case you were wondering. It's not out there in the ethernet, it's actually here. Yeah.
Well, if you're wondering about little old me, I suppose you would go to wadcomedia.com. That's where you find all the links to the stuff. And on Friday nights, after you've come down from the amazing lists we've created, and after you've heard all of the amazing commentary on the state of television in the world today, then Friday nights is a chance for me to sneeze off mic. And Friday nights is there for the podcast this week. Episode number 115. Finally, we've last week Brandon was feeling a little bit under the weather, so I took that opportunity to help my dad celebrate his birthday, and you know we didn't do the show. But this week, when we should definitely be on target for our usual 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific slot, and we should be talking about, hey, I'm actually going to talk about what we're going to talk about. Crazy. It's just one of those days, isn't it? No, we're going to talk about this question that's been kind of burning in the back of my mind, especially since the release of Avatar, The Way of Water.
Is it
And that
what are they
question,
doing at I'm so sorry. I had to inject my what are they doing at Time Warner Cable? Or what are they doing at Time Warner, not even Time Warner Cable. Just because that's the burning question that I'm asking. But okay, go ahead. Yes.
no, our question is, when it comes to lists, you know, we do lists. We know a little bit about lists. But when it comes to list of the best movies, the greatest movies of all time, how come it doesn't correlate with the highest grossing movies of all time?
That's a
Some
good
would think
question.
they should be one and the same. After all, if it's made the most money, it's got to be the best, right? Well, we're going to go into why that may or may not be the case. And we'll be doing that Friday night on the podcast episode number 115.
That's
I think it's
exciting.
going to be
That's
fun.
actually a good question. I like it.
Hopefully, we'll be able to break it down in a fun and engaging manner. And if anybody wants to, watch along live with leave some live commentary in the chats for any of our shows, by all means, join us. You don't have to just download the podcast. Just show up on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday night, and we are more than happy to not only read your comments but show them on screen and actively engage with you, especially for 10-2-1, where I think I'm speaking for both of us when I say we would love to know what some of your selections are for these lists, and we'd also like to know what some of your ideas are for lists. So if you have any ideas for lists. Not that we've run out. I promise we haven't run out. Just to make it a little more interactive, to have you, the audience, more involved in the show. If you have anything you'd like us to talk about, by all means, feel free to shoot that our way. Whether it's the Facebook page or the YouTube, whatever the case may be, just leave the comment and we will check it out and see if we can come up with 10 movies that fit your obscure list. I think that would be a fun challenge to have us
Yeah.
both have to try and figure it out.
Movies where they bake a bread.
Ooh, not bad. That's
I
not
mean,
bad.
that's a pandemic kind of hey, let's retrospectively look back on all the movies where they bake bread.
Movies where at least two characters are actively playing Monopoly.
Oh, I'm sure that happens more often than we think.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. I'm not sure where I would begin with that list though, but yeah, that's delightfully obscure. So if you have any of those kinds of ideas, by all means, not those though, because I just said them, so they wouldn't be your ideas. That would just be rehashing on it. Well, I guess that's going to do it for us here tonight. Wow, just looking at the runtime. Yeah, we, we we took it to the limit.
We had a lot to talk about.
Yes, we did more than I thought we would. I thought I would not have nearly as much to say about 70s science fiction, Earthbound films as I did, but I impressed myself a little bit.
Nice. You made a great list. Good job, Josh.
I think you did as well, and of course, you never fail to impress me because Jen's awesome,
Thank
and
you.
that's why we have such a great show.
I super appreciate that. Thank you so much. I have such a
But,
good time on this show.
but we do have to get out of here.
Indeed.
So thank you everybody for joining us that joined us, and thank you all if you're listening at a later date. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and all of that awesome stuff. I'm Jen. That's Josh over there, and we'll catch you next week. Say goodnight, Jen.